Hello, this is Lewis. I recently uploaded a video showcasing this desert canyon scene that I created. In this video, I wanted to really quickly touch on the some of the blueprints, materials, and essentially techniques that I used to create this scene. So first, I wanted to say that most of the assets in this scene were created using Quixel Megascans, mixed in with some of my own assets. Um, so I think first I'll go over essentially where I started when I built this scene, which is the river. So after creating a, essentially a trench in the landscape where I wanted to place my river, I used this spline mesh blueprint that I created actually a while back that I used for the subway scene that I created back in 2017 because that scene had a ton of cabling and I figured it would be really easy to make all that cabling using a spline mesh blueprint. So let's really quickly look at this blueprint here. So it's fairly straightforward, nothing too complex here. Create the spline and attach um, a mesh to it. And the biggest thing that I wanted for this is to be able to swap out the mesh on the fly, as well as invert the mesh and scale the mesh independently of the scale of the blueprint, as well as I can change its spline up direction and of course swap out the material. So this is something that's fairly straightforward. It's lots of people have guides on making this. Mine I also got from a guide as well, just modified to fit my needs. Um, so yeah, that's the spline mesh that I used. Really quickly, I'll show you what I can do with it. Sort of the basic setup of my river. Of course, I bring this out, and then I go to my terrain geometry here, grab my river part, and change its forward axis to X, and then I can, drag out, alt drag as many points as I want. I can also do it from the back end. Boom. And that's my basic river. And to make the water, I just duplicate the same blueprint that I was using there, and then swap in water mesh. And then adjust the height, adjust the scale to fit, and there I have my water. And then I would just throw on some materials here, like this material and water material. And this spline mesh I used in various areas besides the river. I used it for the track bed, the interior tunnel mesh here, as well as these long mountain ridges in the back. There's 3 of them. I grab this point, you can see it. Move it around. So, speaking of the river here, I feel I should go over the river material that I used. So this is all the adjustable parameters that I have for this material instance. I could change the depth, the edge lip, the edge fade, foam, as well as a normal strength, foam direction, as well various parameters, as well as tessellation. So let's look at the master material for this. So this is the master material for the water. So here is the water ripples, which is layered in 3 parts using the same normal map, just scaled differently and panning using a panner on each of them, panning them slightly differently. I can adjust the strength of the normal map. So this water translucency section is essentially the water depth as well as translucency, and I can control various variables here. There's also Fresnel effect in here, so it's not as translucent at an oblique angle, but more translucent, looking straight down at it. This also drives this foam section up here, letting it know where the foam should be placed. And this foam follows the intersection of where the water meets any other geometry. So I can actually like grab a rock here, let's grab a boulder, bring this in, sink it into the water, and it's creating foam around the edge. Simple color. Real quick, this is, I can also, no matter where instead of inputting a specific variable for where the water is located, I calculate the object position of any object that this shader is attached to. There's also this edge lip normal map that is it's calculated similarly to the foam. Uses this same functionality here to place it, and that adds a very slight sort of effect similar to basically it simulates surface tension where when water meets an object. And roughness is actually driven by the normal map. This is because water isn't, like, if the water is perfectly calm, then it would be 100% reflective. But water tends not to be perfectly calm. It even has micro ripples in it that rough up the surface. And so I use the normal map to simulate that look a little bit. So that's the water material. Delete these. So let's go over really quickly, let's touch on the material that I used for the water bed. This is just a 2-layer material. It uses 2 materials that are blended using the vertex color. I have some macro variation here. This is taken from the gold material that comes with the starter content. I just copy and pasted that. One of the features that I added to this particular material is this wetness mask. And right now, this wetness mask is simply, this wet sand height. Basically, wherever my water level is, I can adjust where the wet sand starts and where it ends. Essentially, I can adjust where the wet sand stops and the dry sand begins. Just to give that little bit of visual interest, I decided to go that route as opposed to adding another paint layer. That way I wouldn't have to go paint all the way down it. Since the water is perfectly level, all I do is I use a very short gradient mask here to mask it out. So as far as other materials go that I used for this, I did create some of my own master materials. If I go down here to master materials, I have a few master materials here. A couple of them I didn't end up using, like this decal master material and this parallax master material I ended up not using. For the decals, I just used the one that Megascans comes with because it uh, works really well. The only change, I did make a slight change to that though, actually, is in the settings here. I changed the blend mode to debuffer translucent color normal roughness. Uh, it got me the blending that I wanted for that. So if we take a look at my opaque master material, it's really simple, straightforward, just um, nothing special. The only really special thing is I added this pixel depth offset blending. And there's various other parameters in here that I can adjust that I have exposed. So the displacement master material is basically just a duplicate of the opaque, just added a ability to tile independently along the U and the V. This is because the displacement material I end up mostly using on objects that don't have an explicit UV map, so I need that ability to tile those two values independently, as well as this displacement function here, which is a material function, and this is something I created so I can easily drag and drop this into any material that I want to create, and it comes with a displacement it comes with a displacement slot as well as the parameter for the displacement amount, and it comes with tessellation, and this tessellation is based on camera position, so it becomes more tessellated as you move the camera closer to it and less tessellated as you move the camera away from it. And that has various variables that I can adjust as well. So really quickly look at my foliage master material. Once again, it's based on the opaque, just with the blend mode changed to mask, shading model changed to two-sided foliage, turn on two-sided, added in a opacity slot and subsurface slot, as well as a subsurface mask if I wanted that. I also added a face camera ability here. This is for any sort of billboarding vegetation that I wanted. I ended up not using this particular function in this scene, but I can turn it on if I want using this switch parameter here. So the terrain, the landscape material that I used for this is very, very simple. Let's really quickly take a look at this. Really, I have just two layered materials for this. Of course, some macro variation. I didn't need too much detail in the terrain, so the only thing special this is doing is it actually blends between two different scales of the same texture for each layer. So as the camera moves further away, it changes to a larger version of that particular texture, and it moves closer, it uses a smaller version. This just to break up the tiling a bit better. But I didn't need to go too detailed with it simply because a lot of the landscape is covered up by vegetation, rocks, and various other models. Really quick, I'll go over the level blueprint. So all I did in this was I have a command to change the pool size, a ability to play the cinematic just by hitting F12, and a couple audio triggers. So if I hit play, and I put in some audio volumes as well, these have attenuation on them. But if I walk up to this mine entrance, you can hear, and that's just attenuation, but if I walk up closer, it plays some creepy sounds. And if I walk up to the water, some water sounds. This is running above 60 frames per second in the editor. Oh, so I think the last thing I can touch on here is these, really quickly touch on these mountains back here. These assets were created using World Machine. I've been using World Machine for a while now. It's a great tool. This isn't super detailed, but I did want some mountainous terrain in the distance, and so this is created just using some basic node setups in World Machine, as well as some basic color that's generated in that as well. I mean, if I zoom in here, it's fairly rough, but when put into a distant space with some height fog over it, it works really well. So hopefully that was all fairly concise and made sense. If there's any questions, go ahead and ask away in the comments. Thank you for watching.